I want to welcome everybody to our panel today on the collaboration to advance education for displaced populations, the vital partnership of faith-based civil society and government organizations. My name is Ryan Coe, and I run the New York office of Latter-day Saint Charities and work with the United Nations here. My role is simply to welcome everybody, give you a few technical details, and then introduce our moderator for the event, Ms. Sharon Eubank. So just very shortly, the technical details. Those of you who have been part of the C20 Summit over the last couple of days know already that you can ask questions in the chat, and those questions will then be fed to us. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on social media, and the recording will be available on the C20 page for at least another year for those who are wanting to go back and review it again. If you get disconnected, please just reconnect, as this will be one of the most interesting panels you have ever joined in your entire life. Maybe not quite that interesting, but we have a fantastic lineup of speakers who will no doubt be very engaging this morning. It is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our event today, Ms. Sharon Eubank. Ms. Sharon Eubank is the president and CEO of Latter-day Saint Charities, which is the humanitarian organization for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She joined LDS Charities in 1998 and worked to establish 17 international employment offices, helping women entrepreneurs and small businesses. In successive positions, she redesigned the humanitarian wheelchair donation program for Latter-day Saint Charities and functioned as regional director in the Middle East for 9 years. In 2011, Ms. Eubank was appointed the director of LDS Charities' worldwide operations. She implemented practical improvements that sourced supplies from local markets, expanded a qualified volunteer base, cooperated more closely with other faith-based organizations, and strategically partnered with global organizations on chronic issues such as maternal and newborn survival, education for displaced children, and cyclical famine-related disasters. In addition to her work at Latter-day Saint Charities, Ms. Eubank was asked in 2017 to serve in the general presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints women's organization called Relief Society. This organization is the oldest and largest women's organization in the world. And in her capacity, Ms. Eubank helps provide leadership and resource for approximately 7.1 million members of this organization in 162 countries. On a little bit of a personal note, I've been associated with Ms. Eubank for about 6 years now, and I still recall my first meeting with her. And after my first meeting with her, I texted my wife, "I want to be Sharon Eubank when I grow up." If you are interested, during next week there will be a G20 Interfaith Forum, and Ms. Eubank will be delivering a keynote address at that forum next Saturday. And with that, I will turn the time over to Ms. Eubank.
It's a very nice introduction, Ryan, and it may be overly generous, but I thank you for it. I'm very pleased to join everybody all across the world in different places, and we warmly welcome all of you who are joining and also our panel today. This is a very topic of very great concern. We discussed part of it last year, and some of the people on this panel were helpful to us there. So I'm grateful that they would join us again and that we would have the chance to continue this discussion that we started in Geneva. Before I introduce our distinguished panel, I just want to provide some context about today's webinar. As I said, we held a similar event during the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And at that event, Bishop Gerald Cosset, who is the presiding bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ, was a keynote speaker. And he made the following statement during his remarks. He said, "A generation with diminished access to education is a generation with diminished employment opportunities, diminished capacity to provide for themselves and their families, diminished ability to contribute to their communities, and diminished hope for the future." The extraordinary circumstances which we find ourselves in this year have unfortunately made Bishop Cosset's statement more relevant and also more urgent than it has ever been before. The global COVID-19 pandemic has created an unprecedented education crisis for children throughout the world. And the effects have been particularly devastating for the efforts to educate vulnerable displaced children, whether internally displaced or parts of refugee communities. Statistics show, for instance, that as many as 50% of vulnerable children whose education is disrupted by an extended crisis like COVID-19 may never return to school. Further evidence shows that even students who do return to school following a sustained disruption often need 3 to 5 years to catch up where they should be with regard to educational attainments. What's most alarming, however, is that COVID-19 has only adding to an educational crisis that existed prior to the pandemic, as illustrated by the stunning statistic that nearly 200 million children were out of school before COVID-19 began. In an effort to address these monumental challenges, Latter-day Saint Charities has launched initiatives with partner organizations around the world. I'll just give 4 projects to illustrate what's ongoing in these efforts. Number 1, in Afghanistan, Latter-day Saint Charities is collaborating with Catholic Relief Services and the Herat Provincial Education Department and the Norwegian Refugee Council to implement an initiative called Quality Emergency Education for Displaced Children. In part, this project provides 60 portable classrooms for 1,800 out-of-school internally displaced children. In Yemen, Latter-day Saint Charities and Rahma Worldwide is building 40 classrooms, procuring learning materials for 1,100 students, and providing ongoing nutritious meals for 48,000 children. The third one, working with Right to Play in Uganda, Latter-day Saint Charities has funded the construction of 8 early childhood development centers serving 3,000 refugee children and certifying 210 teachers in an innovative education in emergency pedagogy. And finally, in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, Latter-day Saint Charities has joined with the efforts of the regional NGO called Jusur to deliver distance learning to refugee children in camps throughout with a combination of educational materials on a social media platform. None of these projects would be possible without willing and generous partners who are equally committed to assisting those in need by making the world a better place. While the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in untold loss of life, disruption of learning, economic failure, and loss of livelihood, the crisis has brought out also the very best in humanity. I wish you could see individuals and families and organizations that have rushed to the aid of some in those communities who are suffering physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The effort to ease the burdens of those struggling to weather the pandemic have been nothing short of extraordinary, in my opinion. At the end of our 90 minutes together today, you should leave this session with some specific knowledge about how faith-based organizations can partner, but you also should leave with the knowledge and the concrete call to action that's not just professional to you, but personal. What are you going to do yourself in your own communities or your own organization? What can you do that will improve education for displaced children at the grassroots level as well as the policy level? Because for us on this panel, this is personal. Our distinguished panelists today represent organizations engaged in this vital relief effort I've been speaking about. Mr. Ibrahim Salama currently serves as the Chief of Human Rights Treaties Branch of the United Nations Office of High Commissioner of Human Rights, where he has served since 2007. Mr. Salama spent 30 years in intergovernmental work, including as a Deputy Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs for International Legal Affairs, as the Deputy Permanent Representative of Egypt in Geneva, and as the Ambassador in Portugal. He's an expert on human rights mechanisms and is a member of the subcommissions on the promotion and protection of human rights. He currently chairs the drafting group of the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders and acts as chairperson of the United Nations Working Group on the Right to Development. He's also a friend. Ambassador Lansana Jabre currently serves as the permanent representative of Sierra Leone to the United Nations in Geneva, where he has served since October 2018. Prior to his current role, Ambassador Jabre spent time at the Security Council report in New York and was appointed finance expert and coordinator of the United Nations panel of experts on Liberia in January 2013 by then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Ambassador Jabre has also served as a senior research fellow at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center in Accra, Ghana. In addition to his diplomatic work, The ambassador is an accomplished academic and journalist who has written extensively on conflict and conflict management in Africa. His scholarly articles have appeared in African Affairs, Africa Development, and many other scholarly publications. Ms. Tinley Chuki currently serves as the Special Appointee for Human Rights in the Tibet Bureau in Geneva. Ms. Chuki is a Tibetan refugee born and raised in India after her parents fled from Tibet in 1959. As a first-generation student, she says her life has been an adventure, balancing the dichotomy of duality. She has personally experienced how displacement brings tremendous challenges and suffering, but also opportunities. From being a daughter of illiterate parents to graduating from Harvard Law School to representing Tibetans at the United Nations, Ms. Chuki has blazed her own trail in the face of trials. The accomplishment of Ms. Chuki she's most proud of is having served as a translator to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Ms. Jennifer Poidatz currently serves as Vice President for Humanitarian Response in Catholic Relief Services. Leading a global team of more than 45 emergency technical advisors and response managers, Ms. Poidatz ensures timely support to CRS's country programs and accompaniment to local partners responding to relief and recovery needs of disaster-affected populations. Ms. Poidatz joined CRS in 1993 as an intern in Ghana. Prior to her appointment as Director and subsequently Vice President of Humanitarian Response, Jennifer led the development of CRS response to the war in Syria, including the initiation and expansion of programming in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Syria. Ms. Poidatz holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Nutrition from the University of Vermont and a Master of Science degree in International Nutrition from Tufts University. As I said before, Mr. Ibrahim Salama and Ms. Jennifer Poidatz participated in last September's event. And as you'll note by some of the questions that I'll direct toward them, we will try to connect those dots. Ambassador Jabray and Ms. Tinley Chuki, while not a part of this conversation earlier, are joining us for the first time with a great deal to add. So, with that very lengthy introduction of a very distinguished panel, why don't we begin? Jennifer, maybe you would let me start with you. Since we last discussed the state of education among displaced persons, what are some updates you could give? How have things gone in the last time since we met in September in Geneva?
Thanks so much, Sharon, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all those listening. It's such a pleasure to join. Yeah, I think I can maybe distinguish between two things. Because I think probably the first thing people think is things have gone drastically wrong, and that's because of the pandemic. And you highlighted very clearly in your introduction the impact of the pandemic, which of course, as we know, with a new school year in many places just starting up again, that impact will continue. As we see that many schools will not open and in some places remote learning will continue. But I don't want to forget about the fact that there had been significant progress. And I think in our education programs and specifically looking at refugee, IDP, and migrant populations in places like Uganda and Jordan and Iraq, Egypt, we were seeing positive changes. We were seeing great progress on increasing the infrastructure for schooling. We were seeing progress on ensuring that girls had access to safe access to school in places like Iraq, where in communities where IS had occupied and then were liberated, where girls were afraid to go back to school given the destruction and the fact that they didn't have latrines that were safe for girls, doors and windows, separations between boys and girls schools. And so great progress there of, the fear that they wouldn't come back, but we saw female students coming back. We saw increased attention to the psychosocial needs of children in these settings, and as well as an increased need for ensuring access to people with disabilities. So I think we have to remember that progress was made. But now we are faced with what I would say, one, ensuring that we don't slip back on those small steps that we've made in many populations in many countries, while we also address the new needs related to ensuring that schooling can continue within the COVID pandemic context.
Thank you for those very specific examples of some of the progress that's we've been made. I appreciate that, Jennifer. Ibrahim, how would you compare the state of education now versus 12 months ago from your position?
No, when I compare this discussion with our latest discussion, it's as if it was completely an earlier life. It feels far more than the few months that separate us from the pandemic. I think this is the major shift. I feel COVID-19 is somewhere a messenger of change that we still resist. Of course, you react to it as a pandemic, but at the same time, the reflection on what it represents and what we learn from it, how it unpacks the realities of structural injustices, both nationally and at many regional and global levels, have not been yet even scratched in their surface. Let me take it for education and to focus on concrete examples of what I consider to be positive beginnings of change. We in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights have been able to have a digital shift, to move like this into gatherings that I was pleasantly shocked to see the numbers by thousands of people who have seen events on Facebook. We would have never reached that had we continued to destroy the environment and to insist on traveling and to invite people and have a lot of cost. So there is a message here that technology should be in the service of environment, should be in the service of human rights, should be in the service of humanity, and of course of education. So I make a link in that direction. So we did at least 20 in the past few months events of peer-to-peer learning, a concept that we have been forced happily to develop further because it became our only way to outreach. When I link this to education as well, I feel that we still do not have enough tools. And while we're investing as an international community millions in combating the virus, we should also invest a fraction of this in adapting ourselves to what should be a constructive new normal. The new normal is not regaining business continuity as it was, or else we have learned nothing. So we have the peer-to-peer learning that we are developing in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and we also realized that although it allows for a much larger outreach, it still lacks concreteness as to the takeaway. What is it that you get from a gathering like this? So we're still struggling, Sharon and colleagues, and would love to hear your experience as well on what to extract from it, how to make it more than just an inspiring exchange. A last word on something new that happened since we met was to try to move nearer to faith actors and religious actors. And we developed 3 Undersecretary Generals, the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Special Representative for Alliance of Civilization, as well as the Special Representative for Combating Atrocity Crimes. We came up with a pledge for action that I can share later, the connection. It's exactly about what you're doing. What are the actions that faith actors are doing, particularly in the COVID-19, in response to a call by the Secretary General in this respect, and how can they learn from each other? So I think there is something in the beginning, and I think that we, as always prisoners of our habits and comfort zones, I'm speaking about everybody, nobody in particular, we are kind of resisting the fruit of the crisis to some extent, but at the same time, we are naturally reacting to the crisis on a pragmatic basis. So these are the 2 trends I see conflicting since we last met. Over to you, Sharon.
It's a very interesting idea that you're bringing up, that there are some fruits in the crisis that help us build on some of the progress that has been made if we can overcome some of the challenges. I'm interested in technology, and I wonder, Ambassador Gebre, if you could talk a little bit about what conditions you've observed in societies where education is maybe not as generally available. They don't have the access to some of those things that Dr. Ibrahim was speaking about. What would you comment there?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good morning to you all. We have approached, I mean, I speak entirely of Sierra Leone, but before COVID and after COVID period. Very tech-savvy education minister, a young guy called David Senge, who has been able to introduce a number of innovations with education through the COVID period, during the COVID period, including learning by radio, radio program. I think my internet is very unstable. There are radio programs and people can phone in. Radio is by far the most effective means of communicating with many people in a country where the majority are not very literate. But radio goes out, and it is done in several of the local languages, as well as the main language, which is the official language, which is English. And people, the teachers teach even grammar, including verbs, everything through the radio programs. Let me say something about this program. I'm particularly interested in this conversation today with respect to what faith-based organizations can contribute to education. In Sierra Leone, especially for displaced population, you may know Sierra Leone started really as a refugee, as a refuge. It was a displaced population that was resettled in Sierra Leone back in the 18th and 19th centuries. Former slaves and slaves being captured on the high seas who were brought in there. The only education open to them throughout the 19th century really was provided by faith-based organizations, mainly Christian missions. And so we have that strong, very strong tradition of relying extremely heavily on faith-based organizations to provide education. Even currently, many of these schools, I mean, almost all the good schools are actually run by either Christian or in some cases, Muslim organizations. You have the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, latterly the Church of Latter-day Saints, and many Muslim organizations who provide right down to the community level. And state. The missions, the charities that build the schools, we pay the teachers. And that has been working well. It's worked for the past 200 years, and it's working extremely effectively. The sad reality in our society that not very many people, especially not students, at the primary and secondary levels have access to, say, the internet, is that we have had to find a lot of different ways to make sure that kids are not kept in schools. As I say, David Senge, our education minister, a young guy in his 30s, extremely tech savvy, has been introducing a number of very innovative ways. And there was a time when schools were completely shut down, but we realized that cannot go on forever, that we have to find ways to make sure students, kids leave their homes and go to schools, or they are educated somewhat. About 2 years ago, we introduced a free primary secondary education program, which to enroll over 2 million students. And in some cases, some of the students are provided a school feeding program because we realize, especially in the rural areas, that if you don't feed the students, they are therefore the farms. Calls their kids, if you want to eat, you go to work in the farms. So we have introduced a meal program whereby students will not need to go to the farms to eat. So they can actually get food in schools. And that really has increased the number of students who are willing to go to school. And we have had hundreds of thousands just in the past 2 years enrolling in these schools. The technological innovations have been fairly basic, but in some ways they have been quite effective, in part because the COVID situation in Sierra Leone hasn't really gotten completely out of hands. There are currently fewer than 500 cases. There have been a few thousand, but many have been released, they've been treated and released. And we've registered only about, I think, 78 deaths from COVID. So COVID is here, there's a lot of awareness about it, but we have realized that life must also go on. As much as protections are provided, we've decided, especially schools, must go on because we are coming right from the bottom in terms of education. We've gone through a civil war, Ebola came, and there has been a lot of backlog of students not being able to enroll at all. And we are completely determined to make sure that this doesn't happen and that students have to go to school. And so schools are open in all sorts of creative ways and protocols observed, so to make sure that we are not, we keep on with the education program, which is extremely important to us. And as I say, I mean, currently, at least for the good schools, over 70% are really faith-based. And faith-based, but they do not force people to adopt the religion of the charity providing it. It is a secular society, and it is an extremely tolerant religious climate. So you find Muslims attending Christian schools, Christians attending Muslim schools, and if there's a need to say prayers, it is said in both confessions, or the prayers from the two major confessional groups are heard in almost all of those settings to make sure that people do not feel terribly comfortable as if they are going to school to be converted. So we have that kind of system operating currently, and I think it has been working quite well. It could be a lot better, but we've been trying to adapt to the current situation as we go on.
Ambassador Gabre, you brought up several points that I just want to highlight, and one of them is, one of the critical things we're talking about is so much education around the world is provided by faith-based organizations in partnership with civil society and government. And you highlighted that very well in the situation in Sierra Leone. I think another one that is interesting is we have to come up with creative solutions. And sometimes they're high tech, but sometimes they're also low tech. And radio was a great example of that, and that can be effective. And some of those innovations that have been put out in Sierra Leone. Thank you very much. Tinley, this is your own life experience. We're talking about something that you have lived through yourself. Talk about how education provides a pathway forward and some of your own personal experience that might lend itself to this discussion.
A very warm greetings from Tibet Bureau Geneva to all the listeners. Thank you so much, Ms. Yuban, for this opportunity. Special thanks to Carol and Ryan, and it's an honor to be a part of this panel. Thank you so much, Yuban, for that question. I think it's very relevant to the entire topic. Before I start that, I would want to give a brief background on how the Tibetans kind of started with where they started and where we are now. So it was in 1959 under the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who was forced to exile to India. And we just came with nothing. So my parents came across the border, through the Himalayas on whatever that they were wearing. That's all, and nothing to carry. And with that, I think there were thousands and thousands of Tibetans who came. And one of the most important objectives or plans of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we should give credit to his visionary leadership, that he gave the paramount importance to education. He said back in 1959 that the first thing that we will do is build schools rather than monasteries. He built many more schools than monasteries. So in 1960, just within 1 year of in exile in India, with the help of the Indian government, the school in Mussoorie was built. And currently we have 73 schools in India and Nepal with over 24,000 students and over 2,200 staff members. And I think this speaks to the importance of having the union of intentions. Ms. Yuban, I was just listening to your talk yesterday, which Ryan had shared, and you spoke about union of feelings. And I think with that, there should also be union of intentions, which can create wonders in the world and serve the people who are displaced. So coming to my own example and also the examples of Tibetans, as I said, my dad never went to never had a modern education, barely, self-taught reading and writing in Tibetan. He had nothing with him when he came over. He learned to drive truck when he was in the army. He was actually one of the personal security guards of His Holiness Dalai Lama back in Tibet. And then for my mother, she came with her parents, fled to India, worked as a construction laborer, building one of the highest motorable paths in the border area of Sikkim, India. So with that background, I think what they thought was, and I think all the credit goes to them and of course the leadership of His Holiness Dalai Lama, that they also gave importance to the education. And they ensured that my siblings, my elder siblings, would be able to go to the schools established under the Central Tibetan Administration, which looks into the welfare of the Tibetans in exile. And with that, I think, so I always call myself as an experiment child, because my father was, listening to the teachings of His Holiness Dalai Lama, and His Holiness during his trip to Bailakuppe, the South India where I am from, he said that I think it is very important to build a good relationship with the local people and local community as well. And that's when my father said, okay, I'm going to send my next child to the Indian school nearby. Mm-hmm. And trust me, having lived and brought up in that Indian community, where we would celebrate Christmas together, we would celebrate Diwali together and Ramzan. Back then, I would look forward to the festivals with the thoughts of eating out sweets and the savories. But now when I look back, I realize that it was not just my tummy that was filled, but my soul, because of understanding the importance of interfaith harmony and also a very good example of secularism. And with the education, I have been able to be out there, be here with you all and present my thoughts. Education definitely changes how a person looks forward to the life. And with the theme today, I think it's very important to understand that with education, it is said that when you educate a man, you educate a person. When you educate a woman, you educate a family. But when you educate a displaced person, a refugee like me, you are educating an entire community for the next generation to shape their future. And with the blessings of His Holiness Dalai Lama and my parents, I was able to receive that very important building blocks in my life, which helped me in coming forward and getting a good education and being out there and now be able to represent Tibetans at the UN and other international organizations. And this, I definitely owe it to the education. And I think it is very important to understand that there should be access to education, but also there should be discussion on the quality of the education. And especially with the modern education, we are talking about alphabets and important technology, but we also have to understand the importance of human education, value-based education, education of ethics and emotion and social. And I think this is something which His Holiness also talks about, and he has developed. The Dalai Lama Trust and Emory University have collaborated in building up a program called as C-Learning, social, ethical, and emotional learning. Because when we in the 21st century talk about education, it should not just be limited to trainings. It should also be. It is also very important to spread the education to value-based education. That's all from my end for now, Yuban.
Tinley, you have your own experience is so compelling, and I'm very thankful that you would share some of that background with us to help understand. You brought up several points that I hope that maybe we could just discuss a little bit more. First of all, you showed the example of the ways that good opportunities like the ones you had can reduce tensions in the society, extremism, and actually build social cohesiveness as you share each other's experiences when schools are open in that way. So I appreciated that. You also talked about the quality of the education, especially for displaced people, is one of the great factors that determines what is available for their future, as yours was. I'll ask everyone to comment about this, but perhaps we could start with you, Jennifer. I saw you nodding when Tinley was talking about the quality makes the difference. What kinds of things influence the quality of education in these settings?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, in addition to the critical and safe infrastructure, the quality of education is so important. And I think the challenges that come up there within populations, refugee populations or displaced populations, is that we need to be sure that the teachers have the support they need to provide that quality education. We have to remember that sometimes the teachers themselves are dealing with trauma that they've experienced. We also have to ensure that there's enough teachers, even though governments do an amazing job to try to ensure in areas of high numbers of displaced people to ensure there's enough teachers. That's a very challenging thing. So looking at situations as, we've seen in Iraq, of being able to complement the teachers provided and supported by government, again, working with the Ministry of Education to ensure that there's sufficient teachers to have the right ratio of teachers to the children in the classroom. And so ensuring that, and as Tinley really said, and I really appreciated it, ensuring that it's not just about, the coursework, it's also that focus on social and emotional learning of life skills that need to be integrated into the education in these, and I would say any population as well. And I think the other thing I want to highlight that for Catholic Relief Services, we really see to be critical is not just supporting the teachers and the students in the school environment, and now also bringing that in some cases because of the pandemic to a remote environment, but also the caregivers, whether there be parents or, grandparents or relatives who are caring for the children, they need support as well. And that has a significant impact on, how they can support the children in their household. And we saw, the importance of, parent-teacher associations. We see the importance of having that outreach to caregivers now remotely through WhatsApp to make sure that, they're doing okay and they're helping the children in their environment. And now, again, especially since we've seen an uptick in violence, unfortunately, and tension, helping them deal with the fact that, they're in oftentimes small and cramped environments with, the children there, that they're balancing a number of activities that they might also, they themselves might not have the skills to support the children in their household in their learning. So providing support directly to caregivers of varying literacy levels to be sure that they're able to provide that support to the children. So I think those are, a few examples that I would like to share on quality of education.
Thank you for those examples. You have a nice comprehensive look at those things and the audiences that we can address. Ibrahim, I wonder if you would comment. I see in the chat that you have talked about Faith for Rights Toolkit. Would you tell a little bit more about that and how it might also influence the quality of education and the opportunities?
Very quickly to say that precisely I admired what the ambassador of Sierra Leone said about going back to simple creativities, like using the radio again, how to rediscover the simple things. Technology is not always the most sophisticated way to do things. It can be the most simple ways. And going back to the most simple ways and inspired by the faith traditions at large across the globe and history, we found that storytelling and direct engagement and dialogues were among the most influential ways of really reaching not only the minds of people through technological cold means, but their hearts, because you engage on one-to-one and eye to eye. So that's what inspired the Faith for Rights peer-to-peer learning methodology that I shared the link about. So we feel that there is much more need for adapted transmission tools of education, for adapted methodologies of education to suit the current situation. I mean, the virus and the displacement have something very deep in common. Everybody has been taken out of their habits. It's not only the people who are physically displaced. We all are changing habits and environments. So unless and until we change our ways of dealing with each other, starting by education, we wouldn't have learned the lesson. With your permission, Sharon, I would ask my colleague Michael Winder to give very, very quickly specific references in that toolkit. It might look a little bit overwhelming because it's big, but Michael will tell us how to use it quickly and what relates to our discussion. With your permission,
Michael,
Sharon.
please.
Many thanks. And as mentioned by Ibrahim, in the toolkit, the storytelling exercises and really peer-to-peer learning are at the core. And also listening to Ambassador Geberi and on the experiences in Sierra Leone, just to flag two concrete examples and exercises from the toolkit. One is on page 17 of that toolkit, and we have included in the chat box the link, where you can see the inspiring urban artistic expressions by a very famous artist, Fields, who went to Sierra Leone, did really educational work with children in Freetown, made a fantastic mural inspired by one family where Paul and Alfreda, two brothers and sisters from one family, one is a Christian and the other is a Muslim. And he basically said, this is inspiring. This shows the real form of tolerance. And on page 46, there's another interesting reference, again on Sierra Leone, where the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, in his mission report on Sierra Leone, again also had a very good example where the Interreligious Council actually diffused tensions between the communities by early on together having a public message against this incitement to hatred and violence. And I think these are really inspiring cases where we can all learn from. Over to you.
Michael, thank you for sharing some of those examples there. As Ibrahim said, the pandemic and displacement are perfect opportunities to change what has been always entrenched for a long time. But people need concrete tools to be able to change their cultural attitudes and behaviors. And I appreciate you highlighting some of the tools that are there in the toolkit. Ambassador Geberi, we've been talking a little bit about the example from Sierra Leone. If I asked you, what could we do to work better together? The partnership between the government, civil society, and humanitarian organizations, what could we do now in the face of the challenges that we face that would provide better coordination? What comments would you have?
You know, I think there has been, over the years, especially during the Civil War, a strong partnership, as mentioned by Michael, between the faith-based organization. There is an interreligious council which played, I might add, which played an extremely prominent role in ending the war. There's a very strong relations between religious groups, civil society, and the government. And I think we can build upon that to make sure services like education are taken to the people, down to the bottom. There is no, currently as I know it, no real difficulty in forging such a consensus, in part because religious groups have been extremely progressive and they work very, very closely. There has been no real tension between the great religions and the great religious groups, civil society and government on critical issues, including especially three critical issues. One, providing health to people, education, but also in responding to emergencies. So I do think, though the government has been played over the past few years a more active role in education, we've set aside a budget of over 21% of the national budget to education. That's still not enough. There are critical gaps, including even providing classrooms, teachers. And so part of what is needed really is to provide quality teachers and other support towards building quality education. It is not just enough to enroll students in schools. I think what is important is to provide real education, proper quality education. And this is a role I think faith-based organizations provide. I mean, I am a beneficiary of a faith-based organization. I went to Christian Association.
Ambassador, we're having a hard time hearing you, and it might help if you turn off your video and see if that boosts your broadband. We'll come back, because I think the comment that you made, that you yourself are a product of a faith-based education, and some of the things that government can do to increase the quality of the teachers and the buildings are very important. Anything else to add, Ambassador Bray?
I had a break. Yes, as I say, providing quality teachers, even if they are coming from abroad in other settings, will be extremely important to augment what we do currently, because we have had during the war years in terms of training teachers and getting quality people to an area. I do believe that faith-based organizations can play a very critical role, but also in terms of the
Ambassador, we've lost your audio again, but let me turn to Tinley and just ask that same question.
I'm sorry, my connection is really bad.
No, you're just fine. We understand this is part of the innovation of technology. What could we do to work better together? The ambassador talked about sometimes there are no tensions and things go forward. Sometimes there are tensions among the community, among the groups and the government. What could we do that would improve that in your estimation?
Yes. So when you say about how we can ensure that there is a cohesive working between the civil societies and the governments, I think, again, I would like to go back to our case of, from my personal experience, how faith-based organizations, including, many of the civil societies, have worked in a very cohesive manner with the government. So when His Holiness Dalai Lama came to India, we didn't have any infrastructure. So I think the reason why I said during my opening that the union of intentions is important is that when you have the right motivation, when you have the right intent to, a very perfect or important goal to achieve, I think that would align a lot of civil societies and governments towards the right direction. I think that's very important to, first of all, understand what is the goal that we are looking for. And secondly, I think when it comes to a lot of civil societies and the government functioning together, there is the government has the means, but the civil societies do not have the financial possibilities or viabilities. And I think this is very important, where the civil societies can go hand in hand and the governments comes out with the specific projects and funding requirements. Secondly, I think it is also about, as I said, infrastructure. Even though the civil societies are very well-intentioned in ensuring that there is access to education, I think the first and foremost problem that the civil societies or the faith-based organizations face is having a proper land and permission to build schools, or just to start a process of building a school. And I think that is where the government can step in and ensure that proper lands and infrastructure materials are given. So when it came to the Tibetans, I think Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, back then the Prime Minister of India, ensured that he called in all the chief ministers of India and said that this is the requirement, that His Holiness the Dalai Lama intends to build schools. Can we help him in his goal? And Karnataka was the first state which came forward and said that, yes, we are willing to give. And we were granted thousands and thousands of acres of lands so that the Tibetans can settle and also build school and preserve their culture. So I think, first of all, identifying the intention, identifying a common goal, and then working together from the financial angle and from the infrastructural angle. I think that's very important. Moving on to the quality of education, I think we have faced a lot of problems because we did not have teachers. The entire generation of Tibetans who came from Tibet were not educated in modern education. So I think that is when, again, the government of India stepped in and ensured that teachers were sent out and appointed under the government's role. And the entire central government of India stepped in and ensured that the teachers were sent out to these rural areas and ensured that they had the right training to educate the next generation of Tibetans. And in our history of this, I think, of course, under the right leadership, but also there were many, many civil societies, including from the US, which stepped in and provided financial assistance. I think Red Cross was involved, the Save Our Souls was involved, and the USAID is one of the major donors, and many, many faith-based organizations also donated. And I think one is, as I said, the infrastructure, but also financial contributions from many donors helped the education to be started in the right direction for the Tibetan refugees.
Tinley, thank you very much. In the chat, a number of people watching were asking about what are the elements that go into that unity of intention that you have talked about. And I think you've highlighted several of those. I think the financial contributions from civil society, the government being able to give permission for the land and for the construction, providing the curriculum for the quality of the teaching. And Ambassador Gabray, you also mentioned increasing their education so that it's more than the 1%, so that there are the financial resources within the governmental budget. What are some of the others, and I ask this to the group, what are some of the other elements that create that union of intention so that education can successfully go forward?
In Sierra Leone, there's no real tension between faith-based groups and civil society, much the same thing, and government. The contribution of faith-based organizations to education for the past 200 years has been immense, overwhelming. Nearly everyone, elite or non-elite, everyone must have attended a faith-based school or college. And so that's widely accepted. So there's no real tension. In fact, because there's no real religious tension within Sierra Leone society. As much as it is secular, it is also quite religious, but religious is a private affair. And nearly everyone in Sierra Leone confesses to being either Christian or Muslim. But there is no tension between the two great religions. And so nearly everyone attended or send their kids to one faith-based school or the other. In part because, as I said, most of the faith-based schools have extremely high quality of education that they provide, because they do get teachers. We had a huge gap in the training of teachers during the Civil War. And one area that faith-based organization with their wide universal reach can contribute and forge a stronger partnership is really that area. I mean, the resources side, as I said, we've committed 21% of the national budget, which itself is not that large, to education, but that still is not really enough to provide even classrooms. It is certainly not enough to provide the quality teachers that we have, to set up libraries, to any number of things that ensures high quality education. And technology is one other area. I mean, nearly every young person do their WhatsApp, they do their Facebook, but that's not in a very structured way. The young Minister of Education has been very tech savvy and has been trying to use all of those resources that the students have in a more constructive way. But that's obviously very difficult. We simply don't have the resources to make sure that the provision of quality Wi-Fi is there. And that's where I think in some of those areas that this organization can play a role. As I said, there is absolutely no tension between them and government and civil society. And this can be done collaboratively, in a cooperative way. It's been done over many, many years, and it can still be improved. And it is always very extremely welcome in Sierra Leone, for sure. And that kind of partnership is what actually we are looking for, a structural partnership with faith-based organization that can make increased investment in the educational sector, especially in this COVID period, wherein the attention of the government is as much drawn to public health issues, the economy, as to the education, which is our flagship program, ensuring free and quality education for everyone. That's our key priority as a government. But because of this COVID thing, that has been increasingly been a challenge. And any support from that area will be extremely welcome from particularly faith-based organizations. As I said, we all attended, many of us, I mean, I did, surely, from faith-based schools, and we are deeply attached to them. They are part of the cultural educational fabric of Sierra Leone from its foundation in the 18th century.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. That same very question for Ibrahim and Jennifer. What are those elements of that union of feeling, and what more could we do?
Yeah, just to maybe add to a few things to what the other colleagues. And first, I just wanted to highlight, it's so great to be on this panel with the Ambassador, CRS, Catholic Relief Services in Sierra Leone. When the pandemic hit, when we shifted all our school feeding programs to house-to-house school feeding, or feeding for school-age children, we actually delivered those radios that were used for the education activities. So it's interesting to be on this panel together and to have worked on that together. Just in terms of the collaboration and coordination, I think it's really critical. I think from a few things to highlight from my side. One, it ensures that everybody's working from a common plan, of course, with the leadership of the government, and that all actors can bring to the table where their strengths are. And, and in many places for the faith-based organizations, that might actually include infrastructure, and other places maybe not. But I think especially that capacity of faith-based organizations in the church for those social skills, psychosocial skills, mental health and psychosocial support, networks of volunteers that have outreach into the community. So I think that collaboration makes sure that everybody's, making the best of what everybody can bring to the table. Of course, the government's so critical there in terms of as well the curriculum and the certification processes that you had highlighted as well, Sharon. I think the other aspect of it is not, it kind of forces us to look at education, in a silo, because all these other aspects, people need, especially those who are most vulnerable, they need to have holistic support and multi-sectoral support. And I just wanted to highlight, by bringing in, these different groups, one of the key areas is livelihoods, because if a refugee family or displaced family doesn't have support to restart their livelihoods and have some source of income, they're very less likely to be sending their children to school. So I think it brings in that multi-sectoral aspect as well, that's really critical. And I think, I'll stop there, but those are a few things I wanted to offer about the importance of that collaboration.
Thank you. Those are very specific. Ibrahim, go ahead.
Sharon, knowledge is so poor without spirituality. And I think what we need most as a partnership for change, learning from the lessons of this huge revolutionary change in human civilization in the past few months, is a more alignment between the efforts of faith actors on one hand and human rights defenders on the other hand. The artificial divide between them is absolutely a drain of resources. Of course, there can be tensions and differences, but these should be respected. They are part and parcel of human rights to respect the differences of others. Let me take an example to which you will be particularly sensitive. And I hope that Erin can put the link to your latest speech online, because I will use the title of your speech, By Union of Feelings, We Obtain the Power of God. Here is my human rights translation of it, and it's exactly the same. By collectively defending equal rights, we achieve prosperity for all. So spirituality takes you to the same end result of rights, but together you almost do not need monitoring because you have the self-monitoring inside. So this is one of the elements that I think we are doing it without even realizing. If I tell you, Sharon and colleagues, the number of statements and initiatives and new precedents that involve religious actors into human rights work, and the human rights community being interested in the tensions and complementarities with the faith sphere, you will see that a lot is happening. We just do not link the dots. We do not conceptualize it properly. But who cares if we conceptualize it or not, if it's happening? But your question is how to accelerate what is happening already. And I think we certainly need to invest in a new vision for education. I think that one of the huge shifts the pandemic has done already is that it uncovered our structural weaknesses. Look at what was the weakest part, the most impacted aspect of human rights. It is economic, social, and cultural rights. It's health, it's work, and it's education. Those three fundamentals are economic, social, and cultural rights, and they are also collective rights. When you spoke at the end of your speech about the oneness, but this is exactly the added value of the collective rights as opposed to the individualism that plagues modern civilization at large. See, these are also only headings to what we can achieve if education becomes the cooking and melting pot of the new lessons if we learn them. We are seeing them unfolding, but we're not linking the dots. Over to you.
I hope that we write a book about some of these ideas because we're just scratching the surface of so many good things. We have about 15 minutes before we end, and Tinley, I will come back to you. I want to hear your comment, and then I want to ask a final question that is about what can individuals do to help promote and advance and accelerate that unity in their communities, the educational attainments for the next generation. So often the answer is about donating money to organizations, but what might individuals who are listening do? Advocate in their own professions, which may or may not be in this arena, in their own communities, in their families. We'll talk about that. But Tinley, you have a comment, and I would love to hear what you were going to say.
Yes, with the question on unity of intentions, I just wanted to add just a few points. One of the most important aspects that I feel is identification of the stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I think it's not just the individual who needs the education, but also the family, because I think family plays the backbone of that individual who is seeking education, of the student that you want to educate. So when we talk about the quality of education, we are talking about ensuring that teachers are good, that the professors are good. But I think at the core of it is also that how do you ensure that the family is educated about the importance of education. And I think in this, as Mr. Ibrahim said, I think the peer-to-peer learning needs also to be extended to peer-to-peer storytelling, peer-to-peer counseling. Because from my personal life, please permit me to share this story. My mother, we had a very small grocery store, and we lived within the Indian community. And just a few doors after our home, there lived a very poor, Indian Dalit family, and Dalit people are considered to be untouchables. And the father was quite, educated somewhat. And one day, the mother came to my mother and said, I want to educate my daughter. She has just finished her 12th grade, but her father wants her to be married off because he wants her to be settled. Can you please tell him and guide him on this? And my mother called on him the next day and said, listen, I know being a parent is difficult. I know that you care for your child, but please remember that when you educate your daughter, you are empowering her to ensure that throughout her life, she is able to stand on her own legs and not be dependent on her husband or on her in-laws. And listening to that, I think there was a change of heart, because she spoke from a person who has never been to school, and talking about the importance of it from that angle. He sent her to school, and she became a teacher later on. And I think that is the power of peer-to-peer storytelling. And that is the power of a parent telling to next parent, the other parent, that this is the importance of education. Please, thank you so much for giving me that opportunity to share the story.
I'm so glad we didn't miss that point, because the power of keeping the decisions with the families, where the best decision making is for their own families, and then the power of parents and families to help other families, as your mother did for the neighbor. Thank you very much. We did not want to miss that, Tinley. Thank you. All right, we have 8 minutes, so that means 2 minutes apiece to talk about what can individuals do? What can we take away that is concrete that we can do in furtherance of this in our own circles? Let's start with Jennifer, and then we'll move to Ibrahim.
Great, thanks, Sharon. So very quickly from my end, I think it depends on the context, but I would say for those of us who, might find us in a context where, there's inequities in terms of access, and especially for refugee and IDP and migrant populations, we can have a voice to ensure that those children have access to public schools, just like other children, and look for solutions there through this collaboration that we've been talking about. We can advocate to donors who provide support to education programming, to be really looking at it from a holistic standpoint to ensure, again, especially for these vulnerable populations, that it's not just about bricks and mortar and teachers, but it's also about ensuring the teachers have those right skills, ensuring that there's support beyond just the math and the science, and that we're looking at those life skills and incorporating psychosocial support. And I think finally, again, that support to caregivers, that's so critical. One of the things that CRS is actually working on with Latter-day Saint Charities is developing guidance on how to design context-specific caregiver engagement activities that both help them address the mental health and psychosocial support needs of children, but also support that they might need themselves. So yeah, a few areas of action, and of course, more resources are always needed. So I have to say that. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, because those are actionable that everyone can take away. Please, Ibrahim.
As you may have expected, all of you, I would say for governments and NGOs, invest in the production of innovative education tools that are accessible and adapted to the poor, to the displaced, to the needy, to people in very exceptional circumstances. And we have no excuse with technology now not to come up with something that works for all. You know what's the problem is? It's intellectual property rights. It's what sells. It's the same wars around the vaccine and around medication. So that requires political leadership, and that's the role of governments. But with much lesser authority and power, NGOs can produce the tools that denounce injustices, and structural ones in particular. So innovative education tools that brings spirituality and human values along with the rights language together, because then the commitment and the compliance is not by fear of the law from outside us, it's by love from the heart, from inside. So that's for governments and individuals. I would say for individuals, and I was smiling when hearing you, Tinali, saying so about the stories of your childhood. My advice for individuals is to do what exactly you did. And that was my story as well. I used to tell stories to my kids. They're now 30 years old. Guess what? They remember them up till now. So there's something magical about direct engagement, about speaking to the youth, about speaking to children. If you don't have children, and even if you do have children, go and try to bring other children as well. And here it's an opening for those who have no parents or whose parents are not sufficiently able to do this, or they have to run for the bread and butter of the family. So try to find a space where you can bring others in addition to your children. Over to you.
Ibrahim, thank you for bringing that although there is a role that only governments can play in civil society, there are things that we can do that will increase the connection of us in our hearts and the cohesiveness of the community. And it's true, we only remember the stories. People will walk away from this podcast and they will only remember the stories. They won't remember the policy. So I appreciate that. Ambassador Gabre, we're coming to you. And then Tinley, we will ask you to have the final word, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Well, I can't get the video. Let me say something in closing that may sound extremely unfashionable and building upon what Ibrahim said. And I'll have to emphasize is the importance of religious instruction. As I mentioned in the introductory statements, I began my life as a journalist and academic, and I looked at the war in West Africa extremely closely and wrote a book about it. One of the things that I've marveled people about post-war Sierra Leone has been the absence of revenge seeking against those who were perpetrators. And I went around with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission during their work. And one thing that struck me was the very high importance of the religious elements in trying to promote reconciliation, forgiveness, reintegration. And that has been built upon the Reconciliation Commission into school syllabuses from the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission about the value of forgiveness, the value of accepting others, even those who you may suspect to have been perpetrators of really nasty atrocities. And that foundation of religious education, I believe, has been extremely important in ensuring a more stable Sierra Leone after the war. I think that kind of thing that needs to be built upon a sense that we are all one community, irrespective of background, irrespective of so-called tribe or religion, and that we can work closely together when we all respect each other. And that respect for different values, different traditions, have been a bedrock of sound faith-based education in Sierra Leone. There has been, and that is extremely important in building of a nation state, in the sense that we are all parts of a global, however different we are in economic terms or in social terms or in religious terms. And that's the kind of education that we value over and above all else, because it's extremely important to stability, to the economic growth, and to building a stable society. And that is a role that faith-based schools are provided, and they're extremely important. We value them. And that, I think that kind of religious.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for creating this.
I really do value the personal experiences of is it Tia? Do I pronounce it correctly? That is terribly useful, and Ibrahim's perspective has been extremely useful, because this is a lived experience for us in Sierra Leone, and to reintegrate our society and to reconcile. And I think the foundation of that reconciliation, frankly, has been religion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tinley, you will have the final word, and we so appreciate all participating. What would you leave us with?
As I said, I think individual responsibility is so underrated. As Rumi says, I think you are not just a drop in the ocean, but you are an ocean in the drop. I think that's very important, that if my mother, who has never had an education, could change the life of that girl and the family, I think any of you out there can do that. And also, I think the crux of the message is that you have to understand that humanity is one community. No matter what religion, culture, race you belong to, when a person gets the right education and a value-based education, he can make difference to not just that one community, but to the entire world. So I think that's very important. And in the words of Shanti Deva, which His Holiness often quotes, the prayer goes like this: as long as space endures, as long as sentient being remain, until then, may I too remain and dispel the miseries of the world. And I think that's the crux of the individual responsibility, that you take it upon yourself and ensure that what you can do to change one person's life can have ripple effects and can change the course of the world altogether. So thank you so much, Sharon, for giving me this opportunity and having me the opportunity to have the last say.
Thank you to everyone. We could not have had a more diverse and cohesive panel. I very much appreciate the comments that were made today. My sincere thanks to everybody who participated at home. And I will look directly at you and say, do not leave this event without committing to do something to put your ocean into a drop, as Tinley said. I close by thanking Ryan Coe, the director, and his staff in the New York Latter-day Saint Charities office. Also, Oscar and Carol McConkey, who represent Latter-day Saint Charities in Geneva, for their support of this event, and also the organizers of the C20 being hosted by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Thanks to everyone for participating, and do something good. Thanks again.